Well, good morning, everyone. It is exciting to welcome you this morning, this wonderful Friday morning, brisk with a little, what did I say, frost on the ground today. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure we will have a few more people entering our session today, but I want to just begin by saying welcome to you, and that I am so glad that you have decided to be a part of this morning's leadership breakfast at Roberts Wesleyan College. Many of you had planned to join us last March for this event, and while we are disappointed that that couldn't happen, we thank you for being here with us today on Zoom. And although we are not enjoying a campus breakfast together, I hope you will still enjoy your coffee or your breakfast during this time. As you may have heard, the college has recently announced some exciting news related to a new building and a campaign. And that came with a lead gift to a new building that will be on our campus that will be named the Golisano Community Engagement Center. And I am excited to begin this morning by giving you an exclusive look at what this new center will look like. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to put up on the screen a video for you to watch and see what is happening on the campus of Roberts Wesleyan College. Well, we are thrilled to be able to show you that video as we begin to plan for what is ahead in the fall of 2022. This facility will provide a much needed space for our students, along with housing our community institutes at Roberts Wesleyan College. As a matter of fact, it will be a hub connecting businesses and organizations, leaders in our community with college resources to help them grow and thrive. This event will be hosted in that building, and we are so excited about that in the future. Let me tell you a little bit about the institutes that we are sponsoring right now. The Business Solutions Institute, which serves businesses and organizations with training, consulting, or special projects needs, focusing on targeted solutions to grow revenue, enhance productivity, and build skill sets. The Justice and Security Institute, which conducts research and delivers training to help public and private institutions protect their infrastructure, assess risk, and prevent acts of violence. The Justice and Security Institute's new digital forensic lab can assist you in your cybersecurity needs by utilizing the latest computer systems and software designed specifically for forensic data extraction and recovery. The third institute is the Intellectual and Spiritual Humility Institute, and it is close to my heart because it provides teaching opportunities focused on bringing communities together in a polarized society, creating space for respect and dignity of all people. And we have a new institute, which we're calling the Westside Psychological Services, which provides evidence-based psychological services to children, adolescents, adults, and families in the Rochester area, including assessment, therapy, and consultation, and trains the next generation of professional psychologists through its affiliation with Roberts Clinical School Psychology Doctoral Program. There are many local organizations that have already utilized or have expressed interest in the customized training available through our institutes. These have included government, healthcare administration, law enforcement, school districts, and churches, as well as businesses like yours. I hope you will stay connected with us through the institutes and follow our progress as we plan to break ground this next spring and celebrate this new space on our campus in fall 2022. Before we get going with our program this morning, I would love to begin in a word of prayer. So if you would join me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for our rich history, rooted in faith and leadership of individuals who are dedicated to acting on what they believe. We are so blessed to live in a country of opportunity and freedom, where we can come together as a community to learn from each other and inspire each other to continue to serve in ways that benefit others, especially those less fortunate. We thank you for your guidance in the past and pray for your wisdom today, that we will be equipped to build a future that is better for all people. We pray for your will and purposes to be accomplished. In Jesus' name, amen. At this time, Lisa Tiffin, who directs our corporate and foundation relations work here at Roberts, will introduce our special guest. Lisa.
Thank you, President Porterfield. And if my panelists will join me on camera and unmute, that'd be great. Welcome to everybody. And as President Porterfield stated, it is an exciting time to be on campus with our new building. And I can't wait for all of us to be together in the same room in the new building. That will be exciting. In the meantime, we're very grateful for the technology that allows for us to be together virtually. This is our very first virtual leadership breakfast, and I'm excited. And I'm excited for this topic of risk that we wanted to look at back in March, but is even more appropriate now to be talking about. And so I briefly want to introduce the panelists and then get right into our questions. We have with us Sankar Sunath, who is the president and CEO of CDS Life Transitions, a very large not-for-profit serving people with disabilities in Rochester. And on our registration page, of course, you can read a full bio for Sankar. Thank you for being here with us today, Sankar.
Thank you, Lisa.
And also with us is Angela Sims, who is the president of Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School, a very important institution in Rochester. And I'm just so grateful to have you with us today, Angela.
Thank you. Good to be here, Lisa.
And also with us today is Terry Tabor. He's the Chief Technical Officer and Senior Vice President at Kodak, a Rochester institution, if you will. And Terry is also one of our board members at Roberts. And so I'm very grateful that you are here as well, Terry.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone.
So we're going to jump right in, as I mentioned, with some questions. I had the great fortune to be able to chat with each of our panelists way back in probably January, February. I think, Sankar, you and I talked in December, maybe. And so from those interviews, we have some great questions that we want to ask you. You guys are in for a treat. Some really good stories that you're going to hear today about risk, and some great takeaways that I think that you'll have. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A function. As we go along, as you hear our speakers tell their stories, please feel free to add your questions into that. I know we usually use a little app called Slido, we've got this great Q&A function. I will see those and I will work those in. So please, add your questions as we go. So let's kick it off. Sankar, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
Back in December when we talked, you told me once that your operating philosophy and what defines your success is how you and your organization treat the individual. So tell me, how does that philosophy, how has that influenced you to take risks? And in particular, how you developed your spice company and your contract?
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everybody. And what a great panel. I'm really excited to be with you today and to share with you what's going on at CDS. Now, just to give you a little background, uh, I've been with the organization 32 years. The organization started in 1977 with a group of parents who wanted their children to graduate from high school and to go live on their own. And what these parents wanted was to move from this conception that people with intellectual disabilities were somehow lacking, that they were different from other people, and they wanted their loved ones to really be a part of society and to push the boundaries so they can participate in work, life, they could live outside their home, they could have friends. And so CDS started, and during that a 20-year period, they saw significant growth where we grew our residential homes for people. We added day programs. Now today we have about 14,000 people in our network, not just in Rochester, but all over upstate New York, from Niagara Falls to Binghamton, 30 counties, and actually 40 counties. So we have a large footprint, and it's because we are trying to build community where people have special needs and they need supports. So you come back to CDS and risk. Throughout the entire time I've been with the organization, I've observed when I was a staff person, the organization taking risks to make it more inclusive for the individuals. And we started a clinic in the town of Fairport in 1995. As we built the organization, we said, what a nice thing would be to have people go to a clinic where they could receive the full complement of medical, psychological services integrated with everybody. And that was a huge gamble because at the same time, the company had invested in purchasing 2 properties to handle the Kodak business. You've probably seen in some of the write-up, and I'll talk a little bit about the Kodak business. So it was taking some risk to open a clinic and then the Kodak business as well. So, and I think, Lisa, this is what you want me to talk about, is risk. And anybody looking back would say the organization was growing so rapidly that it really needed to be careful when it took risk. And it had a really great heart. People wanted to make sure that people got what they needed, but the execution wasn't there in terms of the opening of the clinic. Well, we went into a tremendous capital expenditure, spent about $5 to $7 million. And now this organization had a $22 million budget. So at that time, it grew and took on these loans. And long story short, we had to close that business because it wasn't executed right. We didn't know the market share, our budget wasn't proper, so we were taking really unnecessary risk. And then at the same time, we bought a property off of Blossom and Winton Road, which is now our spice packaging operation. And at the time, we had the Kodak business. And the Kodak business was really packaging disposable cameras. If you remember back 20 years ago, Kodak came out with these disposable cameras. And our organization secured that contract to assemble all of them. And just think about it, people with intellectual disabilities given an opportunity to do real work and earn real wages, which was unheard of back then, but they did. And we really enjoyed that contract. We needed the extra plant, But again, there was a big misstep by the organization. We really didn't engage Kodak to talk about what their strategy was. Where were they moving with their business? And relative to the camera business, they were making plans to move that business out. At the very moment we were purchasing that facility to handle the demand for Kodak. So here we were attracting so many people with disabilities to work at CDS. And then as soon as we opened the facility and we put all the equipment in, we relocated, within 1 year, Kodak notified us that they were taking the business to Mexico. You guys remember NAFTA? That's what NAFTA did. It encouraged people to take their businesses out of the US. And so it gutted our employment program. And so when you had all those things happen to the organization in a very short period of time, it brought tremendous pressure on us because it started, when you're in such financial stress, it starts to affect the morale of the organization. Finances are down, the morale of the staff's down, the turnover is very high, people are leaving the organization, quality of services drop, financial health is really down. And so I became the CEO in 1998, right as we were in the middle of this crisis. And so I had to go and learn about all of our businesses all over again, get to know them really intimately. And to take a long story short, because I know our time is limited, I went in to Unistel, our employment program, at Blossom Road, and it was desolate. It was, there was no work for anybody. There was hardly any staff. But in one room, there were two people packaging spices. Think in Rochester, New York, they were packaging spices, and it fascinated me. I was like, what is this? And the staff educated me that it was a contract we secured from the federal government to supply to the US military spices. And I said, well, how large is this contract? And I said, well, about $100,000 a year. And I said, I need to study this. I need to figure out exactly what this is and what it means for us. And what I found out was that there's an organization called the National Institute for the Severely Handicapped. They are like a private administrative arm working with the government to give access to federal contract by organizations that serve people with severe disabilities. And so we got this contract, and I said, why is it so small? And I learned that CDS management at the time didn't feel like they had the resources to grow the business. So even though we were financially strapped, I said, the way to get out of this crisis is that we have to grow. We will grow or we will die. And one of the ways we were going to do that was to take a look at the spice business. So we met with all of the key players. We convinced them that we were willing to expand. We talked to the government, and we were given a brand new contract with a lot more business. And so we were able to replace the Kodak business. It took us about 3 to 4 years to do this. We went to the Golisano Foundation, got a grant to install semi-automated lines for packaging. We also bought an automated line for packaging spices. And gradually we saw the renewal of Unistel, where it became a vibrant organization again. So taking a risk to enter into the spice business, the thing I learned was we really needed to study it. We wanted to make sure it was viable. We wanted to know what the business return was going to be for us. And we wanted to execute impeccably. And by building relationships, putting out a new business plan, and working on it with the government. So a lot of learning, but in the interest of time, I will just share with you that that's how we were able to reinvent Unistel, our work program. And I would welcome anybody to come and visit to see what we built there. It's a certified, safe quality foods facility run by people with developmental disabilities. A remarkable thing.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that story, Sankar. I heard some themes of sometimes we take a risk and it doesn't pan out, like when you had to shut the clinic or when the initial contract. But what I also heard you say was you didn't just take a risk on the spice thing and say, hey, this thing could go. You studied, you learned, and you managed that risk. And I think that's really interesting. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here for my panelists. We talked a little bit about Kodak, and some of what you're saying, Sankar, kind of ties into, Terry, some of the things that you talked about. And one of the things that you told me was that you can never eliminate risk. You can just manage risk. Can you give us an example of managing instead of eliminating risk?
Certainly. I think as leaders over time, we learn different ways to approach how to manage risk. We would always like to make it go away. But the example I'm going to talk about was a new 400-speed film program that I was asked to lead. And amidst a very strong competition with Fujifilm out of Japan. And the intent was to advance the state of the film technology by 10x what we had ever done in any given program, and to do it in less than half the time, and of course with as low of a budget as possible. And so as we started that program, I've learned as a leader that there are three components that help address risk of any degree, small, large, or medium. One of those is the composition of your team. And I think there are two components that really matter beyond having the right qualifications. One is diversity of thought. And that comes from diverse backgrounds, whether it be gender, ethnicity, whatever. That is so important. And a leader needs to be responsible for bringing that together. The second is I always want to have people on the team who ask those tough questions, who are not afraid to ask the tough questions. And that's also important. So I brought such a team together. And so that was a good first step. But we had this huge task in front of us. So one of the things I used in that program for the first time, and I use it all the time now, is I carved up the team into sub-teams. And I gave each sub-team a sub-team leader, and they had responsibility for a certain portion of the risk and of the project. And so given the nature of this program, there were technology risk. So there's a lot of our research and development that needed to be done. There were marketing risks, there were business risk. And so we carved all that up, and I created 5 sub-teams, 5 sub-leaders. I attended all the sub-team leaders, but I let meetings, but I let the leaders do their work. And we came together as a full team twice a month. That was a huge benefit because the people who had responsibility for this set of problems and the risks that go with them felt that they could spend most of their time on that. And when we brought the team together, we talked about how things were going overall. The final thing is, as a leader, always think about contingencies. You can call it scenario planning, whatever. You need to be thinking about what are the consequences if things don't go well. And so in that program, it's the first time they brought all of those aspects together. And it was a great learning process, and the team was highly successful. Actually completed the project ahead of schedule, under budget, and completely met all the program goals. And it led to a win for customers because they got better pictures, better systems with cameras. It was a win for Kodak because it led to almost $1 billion additional incremental revenue in the next 10 years. And it was a win for the team because from that, those sub-team leaders became program leaders over the next few years as well. So a great example of looking at what you need to do, carving the risk up, utilizing people, and enabling them to go after it. And it was a great success.
Oh, thanks a lot, Terry. I'll have to say I'm old enough to admit to using 400 speed actual film in an actual camera. So, but yeah, what I'm hearing, one of the through lines that I'm hearing is that it really is about your people. And, you know, in any industry that we're working in, we're working with people and we have to help them manage those risks. And I think that's just a brilliant example of, you know, kind of splitting those teams up, making sure you have diversity on those teams, people who challenge and who think through. And then not any one team is feeling the full weight of that risk other than probably yourself, which is great leadership. So I want to switch to you, Angela. You told me that you don't see risk as a negative, but that you see it as an opportunity. And I love that. I love that when you said it, and I still love it today. What did that concept mean to you? You moved across the country to take the presidency of Colgate, and Colgate had recently downsized its campus. So talk to us a little bit about how you saw that as not a negative thing, but an opportunity and risk.
Thanks, Lisa. First of all, let me say, Terry, you and I share an approach to leadership, and it was really good to hear that. And Sankar, your emphasis on actually meeting specific needs, it really demonstrates the way in which we as leaders are always encouraged to be attuned to how we read context and how we understand the ways in which we come alongside others in our communities. Lisa, I am 16 and a half months in to my tenure at Colgate Rochester Croce Divinity School. And when I think about this notion of risk, for me, it means asking myself, how do I make the best decisions possible, recognizing that I don't know everything? What are those unknown things? And so as I prepared to make my transition from the Kansas City metro area to the Rochester metro area, I was very much aware that there were both external and internal factors that had not been disclosed, not because of any nefarious reasons, but that there's simply only so much information that can be provided during a process of discernment. I'm also very much aware that when it comes to external factors, that it depends on who's gathering the data, who's interpreting the data. And I also recognize that as I am looking at data even now, I need to be mindful of my own implicit and explicit biases that inform my own interpretations and decisions. Was also very much aware of both a public and a private narrative that may not necessarily have aligned with each other, recognizing that when tough decisions are being made, that the trustees in particular have a fiduciary responsibility. And there are certain things that they cannot disclose to the public. And there are also some things that cannot be disclosed to all employees. And so part of risk is thinking about the ways in which we cultivate communities of trust. So one of the things that I've tried to do since joining the community is to meet with all employees, faculty and staff as a collective group, and to extend an invitation to all students to visit with me after each board meeting in October and in February. It is now my practice, my second year in, every October to provide the board with a state of the school report and to share that information again within the CRCDS community. And it allows us to each have a snapshot of where we are, where we've been, because I do a 10-year snapshot. It's a rolling 10-year look back. And now that we have done the work of designing and implement, in the process now of implementing a 4-year strategic plan and looking at the ways in which we are, as a community, providing information so that people can at least have an idea of where we are. And when we talk about building trust, making sure that there are things that we can place on our website. So placing the strategic plan on the website, placing the 2-year strategic priorities that the board has approved on the website, letting folk know who's serving on that strategic plan and an evaluation committee. I also recognize that part of this notion of risk required me to think about the ways in which, particularly during my very first month, that I came in and actually looked at organizational structure and design to ask myself if this was the best utilization of human resources, because CRCDS employees are our greatest assets. But I also was very much aware of the amount of change that the community was in the process of going through, because Lisa, the campus had not been downsized when I arrived. I arrived July 1, 2019. We relocated to our current campus location, which is about less than 4 miles from our previous campus location, the end of August. We did not close on the previous campus until September. But was also very much aware that of the number of alums, of the number of current students who have a deep, deep connection to 1100 South Goodman Street. And so being mindful that for them, that place was sacred ground. It was holy ground. But at the same time, thinking about the ways in which we honor and live into our mission and our vision that might not necessarily be connected to a specific geographical location. And those continue to remain tough conversations for us. But as an alumna of the institution, who is now our retired Vice President of Academic Affairs, Stephanie Sauvé, used to say, and I told her this was her mantra. Stephanie would always say, we are a people who live in hope. So for me, if we are a people who live in hope, who says that etched into the DNA of a 202-year-old institution are commitments to peace and justice, then it means that we can never allow ourselves to become a people who aren't willing to take some risk. But that means we have to be willing to create a culture where failure is not necessarily seen as something that would be viewed as punitive. And so how do we continue to create this space, these spaces, right? Because now we are all working almost 95% of the time remotely. So how are we creating these moments for persons to continue to exercise creativity and to provide them with the resources to actually evaluate the consequences of those choices that they took, and to say, okay, this might indeed be something that we should continue to explore because of X, Y, and Z. But from this, we've learned that perhaps this is not the moment to move forward with this, or perhaps this really doesn't necessarily align with our mission, our vision, and our core values. But I was also aware, Lisa, as I was discerning whether or not to join this community, I was very much aware not only of the institution's commitment to peace and justice, but I was also aware that I was coming to a region that's really proud of its history of being involved with an abolitionist movement and being involved with women's rights. while at the same time being very much aware of issues of racial justice, both at CRCDS, you know, newspaper accounts of now it's been about 52 years that resulted in CRCDS becoming the first accredited school in the US to have a program in Black church studies. But also very much aware of the racial divide, particularly within the city of Rochester, along issues of social and economic disparities. And so holding all of those things in tension and saying that CRCDS's mission really compels us to think about the ways in which we not only engage with our students, but the ways in which we imagine ourselves being a seminary of and for the community with a current physical campus location that runs parallel, that is situated parallel with an operating railroad track, understanding that the history in this country suggests that transportation systems were always and continue to be used to serve as markers of demarcation for wealth and poverty.
Thank you for that. No, there's so much in that. And I'm hearing again that through line of people. And certainly now you started with that idea of decision making and making decisions when we don't have all the answers. And certainly during COVID, each of you, and I'm sure all of our participants, I've seen it in our institution as well, you have to make the decisions. It's a risk because you don't know. But you do what you can to do that sense making. Terry, you mentioned scenario planning for the future. But Angela, one of the things that you mentioned was creating that culture of trust where maybe people don't know all of the facts. You know the facts, you have to make the decision, but you're transparent as much as you can be to sort of create that trust. Now, I want to just remind our participants, please go ahead and send me questions that I will ask our panelists. Feel free to use that Q&A right at the bottom. In the meantime, I want to ask a follow-up question on that. And what about organizations that haven't created that trust or that transparency? I know that President Porterfield at Roberts talks a lot about redo loops, where you kind of are going down the path and you realize, oh, we're not quite hitting what we meant to hit. Let's back up and try a different tack. Let's fix this. Is there any way that you're, let's say you didn't create that trust or the teams that you created, Terry or Sankar, when you shut down some places and said, let's reset. Are there opportunities along the way where you can say, wait a minute, we're not doing this right? Can you do that right in the middle of, say, a crisis like COVID? Is that possible? And this is open to any of you.
So let me, first I want to thank Angela for those fantastic insights. And there are a couple of things there that I think relate to the question you're asking, Lisa. Angela talked about basically the bonds of trust and how important that is within any community. And also she talked about open and honest communication. And I think part of my view on your question is, in the middle of the crisis, it's incumbent upon a leader to recognize what needs to be done if there's not these communities of trust, these bonds of trust, if they're broken. And there are two important tools that I think a leader has: listening and communication. And along the line that Angela shared, open and honest communication. And so we've been through several crises ourselves at Kodak. And one of the things that's important in that time period is to be more visible to people. Working from home is challenging, but at least the technology allows it. And being visible in smaller groups so you can get dialogue. I don't know how many small group sessions of 6 to 10 people I've held over the years, but there's nothing like sitting down with a group of people with no agenda other than to talk about what's on people's minds and to listen and to assess what's important to do for the community, even in the midst of a crisis. And it's a very good thing. It doesn't solve the problem, right? Not all things can be resolved in days, weeks, and some things may never be resolved. But it's important that all of us, whether we're in a leadership position or otherwise, know that the community that we're working in, that we care and trust for one another. And that's what I would focus on. And it really comes down to these, in my mind, it comes down to these small group dialogues. And as a leader, listen, don't dominate, listen.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that resonates a lot with what Sankar had talked about earlier in terms of learning all that you could, Sankar, in terms of that SPICE contract and how could we do this before just jumping in. And I think that's really appropriate, is that, and I think it ties in also, Angela, to what you said about making failure not a bad thing, but something that's par for the course. When you risk things, you will occasionally fail, but it's really, can you learn from that? Can you grow from that? Not, okay, it's all lost, right? Sankar, I want to jump back to you for a minute. You told me once that you went to your board and you asked them basically for millions of dollars to set up a managed care arm of your business. What was your thinking behind that, and how did that risk pan out?
That's a great question again, Lisa. By the way, it was a great conversation with you. I still remember us sitting at Oak Hill Country Club and chatting. I think we spent a couple hours. But I do want to echo what Angela talked about, trust, and what resonated with me when you said, Angela, that we all don't know everything. We don't know what we don't know, and we have to have trust. And I can touch on that a little bit. Even through the crises in our organization, especially when I look back, there had to be trust between the board of directors and the executives, and also from the executive team to the leadership of the organization and the staff. And when we got into crisis, you could see how that broke down because there was a lack of transparency. The more we got into crisis, the less people said, the more paranoid people became. And when I became the executive, I said, we're going to have an open, transparent organization. And even though, and I needed everybody to come in and take a look at the organization because I needed everybody else to help. We were not going to get out of crises without others helping us, people in positions of influence. And Terry, you talked a little bit about that you needed to meet people in small groups and convince them that the mission was still strong. So, you take a look at CDS now. We started, I said, when I took over, we were a $17 million budget. We now have a budget of about 300 million. And we have employees, about 1,300 employees. And we support about 14,000 people. It's become a very complex organization with running a CDS Monarch, the core mission organization, then Unistel, the work program. I Circle, the managed care company, which I will talk about. We also created a housing division to create opportunities for people with disabilities to live like everybody else when they retire. We introduced affordable housing. We have a care management company called Prime Care Coordination, which we acquired during the pandemic, the business, in the March of this year, serving 8,000 people in all of upstate New York. We also operate a program, which I call our corporate social responsibility, Warrior Salute Veteran Services, providing clinical services to veterans with PTSD, traumatic brain injury, who've come back from the wars. And I felt because we work with the military that we had an obligation to give back. And so for the last 10 years, we privately raised the money. We have no funding stream for it. And we provide that as a mission to us. And we had an event this week, and we raised another $100,000 to support that program. The last thing we have is just the foundation. You have to create that nest egg. When I look back at our crises, we had a foundation, but we had like $30,000 in it. And the problems were bigger than the reserves we had. So I had to rethink how we would do with the foundation and how we would grow it to support the mission. So as we were growing the organization, it was all very organic because we were looking at all of the touch points that people needed in their lives to become independent, to become inclusive. So we serve people with intellectual disabilities, people with chronic illnesses, veterans, and our seniors. And we wanted to build this large community. And now with the pandemic, we could see that we could still do it in a virtual form as well. But when the state of New York decided about 10 years ago that it wanted to change the funding system for people with intellectual disabilities, to move from fee-for-service to managed care, meaning the old arrangement was, and the current arrangement is that somebody lives in our group home or they go to our day program, we get a fee every day. The state recognizes that system is financially unsustainable. They determined that about 10 years ago, and they said, we need to change it to control costs. So they want to move to managed care, Medicaid managed care, where you would get a capitated rate run by an insurance company, and you would have to deal with it. So as we got out of crisis, paid back all of our debts, I said we needed to build a nest egg because I knew that the trajectory was not, it was going up in terms of revenues, that at some point the state of New York would put a halt on it. So we wanted to grow the foundation to prepare for what might be a crisis. But then we saw an opportunity that 10 years ago, when they said they want to move to managed care, we went to school, we brought in experts, we said, okay, CDS has now moved from a weak organization to now a very large organization. It has a large presence. We have built a tremendous network of fellow organizations, state officials, federal officials, local leaders. And we said, what is it? How do we live in this new environment? If managed care does come, what do we want to be? And we came to the conclusion that we would want to be a managed care organization, that we would want to lead the effort for the transformation from fee-for-service to managed care. And what that meant was that we would have to apply to become a managed care company, licensed, Article 44 licensed organization with the state of New York. And again, I went to school with my team. I brought in the experts. And the board, by the way, the board is in step with me because we've had an ongoing dialogue with them. They understood what I was thinking about, that we wanted to be in a position of influence. And so we had to do the feasibility. We had to do the business plan. We had to look at strategy, where we were going to be. And here we have this multi-purpose organization with all these different elements, and we had to keep them all straight. And now we're thinking of going into this new business as well. And it took a lot of education for us, but I was so proud of our board because they saw that if we did not take a lead in upstate New York, that somebody else would be telling us what to do. And why not be on the front side of this with tremendous risks for the organization and for the community? But again, our interest was ensuring that people with intellectual disabilities could make this transition with ease and nothing really would change for them. And so I remember that one board meeting that we're going to get to the crux of it, Lisa, right now. So we are having this board meeting and we have wonderful people from the community. And of course, the people with finance background are the ones that are paying attention now, because this is a very risky business. When you get into insurance, you're taking a lot of risk. if you can't control your expenses, you're going to be in losses. If you don't know what you're doing, you could close down within a matter of months. And we've been through the entire analysis. And I said, look, at one point they said, what we need to start up this venture is about $5 million. $5 million because we need to put up reserves. When you get into insurance, you have to put reserves just in case you can't meet your obligations. The state keeps that money, and then if you run into difficulties and you can't exist, they will take that money to pay your creditors. So reserves is a word I've come to not like very much, because you're giving money to the state of New York and they keep it. But essentially, that's what we were dealing with is, okay, you're going into this brand new field. You're going to have to put this money up front. You're making investments in startup, in equipment and people. And the finance chair looked at me square in the eyes and he said, so what you're telling me is this, that potentially we could lose all this money. And I said, yes, sir, I think you're absolutely right. I said, but when you look at our business plan and you look what we're trying to do here, you will see that we've thought it out well. It's very measured. The risk is quite limited as we start because it's going to take a while. And I'm trusting that you will allow me to do this. And I said, by the way, I took a foundation that only had 30,000 in it, and it now has 10 million. I did that, and we grew that for a reason, because we knew this day would come. So we don't have to go borrow the money to start up this enterprise. We will go to the foundation to seed that money. So your risk, and the money, by the way, is not our money. We're stewards of the money. The government gives us funds, and we create profits and surpluses, and then we feed them into the foundation. So I said, now guess what? We have the opportunity to invest what we've gained. And he looked at me, and there was silence around the entire room. And he said, okay, Sankar, I think you sold me. We're going to go with you. We're going to go with you. And that was a huge decision for that board. And we fast forward now 5 years. We started from scratch, and now we support 4,000 people in Medicaid managed care with a budget of $200 million. And we have a presence everywhere in upstate New York. And that footprint allowed us to build our CDS housing division to address the needs of seniors with chronic illnesses all over New York. So I can keep going on and on and on, but you have to take these risks, but you have to be very inclusive, very transparent, and you have to be very educated about what you're doing, understanding the risk, but be very diligent about it, hiring the right people, and setting your priorities straight at all times, and staying focused.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Sankar. Again, I'm hearing these themes of people. I'm hearing these themes of trust. I'm hearing themes of opportunity. And, taking that risk and seeing it pay off. And if it doesn't, learning from it and going from there. Yeah. We have just a few more minutes left before we're going to transition into our breakout rooms. But there are some questions that have come in. And what I'd like to do, if you panelists are willing, is do some popcorn question answers. So I'm gonna rattle it off and pick a name, and maybe you'll give me a 20-30 second answer, and we'll do as many of these as we can in our final few minutes. So Angela, this first one's going to be for you. There's a lot of higher ed people in the audience today, and one of them asked, in your interactions with higher ed institutions, what are the top 3 risks in this industry of higher ed?
Compliance, sustainability, reputation.
I love it. Thank you for that. And Terry, I think this one's going to be for you. This person said, Terry, mentioned that you're making sure that you're asking the tough questions. How do you make sure the challenging questions are getting asked so the organization doesn't have blind spots or flawed key assumptions? as it approaches a particular risk environment so that your risk assessments are accurate?
Make sure that everyone has an opportunity or a venue to ask the tough questions. It doesn't always come from just your leadership group. And so we use either by name or anonymous. People can submit questions directly to me or to anyone in the organization. And we've used that tool for a lot, but you have to open up all venues of communication.
Yeah, that idea of voice is excellent. Sankar, I think this one is suited to you. This person said the challenge is how much risk to take to place people of the organization first versus survival of the institution. So should the level of risk favor the people or the institution? And what helps you decide?
It's a great question. I think it's both. I don't think you can segregate it and say it's one versus the other. Everybody's on the team, the people you serve, your employees, the entire organization. And you have to look at a lot of things. You have to look at the market. You have to look at your financial wherewithal. You look at your infrastructure. You have to look at what you're willing to give up if it doesn't go well. So you look, and then you have to develop your contingency plans. And so you're all in. You're not going to favor the people versus the board. We are all one team.
I like that. And this final question, 30 seconds won't do it justice, but give me your best shot. This person asks all three of you, and we'll just go around the room. In managing risk, what role does faith play in your leadership philosophy and practice? And again, 30 seconds isn't going to do it justice, but your best answer in 30 seconds. Terry, why don't you lead us off?
Certainly, great question. For me, that's where it starts. You start every day in prayer about what I know is going to happen that day and what I don't know is going to happen. And it's part of my decision process is either going to the word or praying and integrating that into my whole decision process.
Thank you. Sankar?
It's such a great question. Faith is at the heart of everything I do. It's this year has been a tough year for our organization. We had a significant crisis, and I remember every day just getting out my Bible and reading, and I keep saying to the Lord, look, this is bigger than me, and I'll do the best I can every day, but I'm trusting that you will make this work. And through the form, as has always happened with me, he helped us find a way. And so I can't do my job without knowing that the Lord is there with me.
Thank you. And Angela, you get our last word.
My faith is informed by Micah 6:8, and I personalize it. God has told you, Angela, what the Lord requires of you: to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. And I try to do that to the best of my ability, and recognizing that there are moments when my faith will require me to apologize and to ask for forgiveness.